those who are perhaps thinking about why Paradise, you will see that many of the problems that these communities faced are also being faced by many people who are now perhaps emigrated and are thinking, should I go back to Ukraine? Should I build back my house? With what money? Who's going to support me? If I go back, am I going to have a job? All these questions from an economic perspective actually have to do with short-term costs and long-term benefits, where the costs are borne by different parties and where the benefits will accrue. And this is the big challenge in rebuilding these communities, when this setup will have both private and public, will have expectations attached to them, expectations of firms regarding taxes, regarding infrastructure, expectations of households regarding income, and so on and so forth. So these are not necessarily remote questions, and I think the presentation today will show us that they can provide very concrete solutions. So I pass on to Neil, who's going to present our speakers. The structure of the workshop is going to be made up of a series of presentations. We're going to take some questions and answers towards the end, and the more general discussion afterwards. I encourage you to write your questions in the chat. I will try to cover as many as possible. And then if anything is left over that we cannot cover, you can always email us. Neil, over to you.
Thank you, Mikna. Neil Madsen speaking to you from New York City, and it's my privilege to welcome everyone on behalf of both the Fordham University Real Estate Institute and the Counselors of Real Estate. We are both humbled and excited to embark on this journey with the Kyiv School of Economics, and we're hopeful that today's program will lead to a long, fruitful, and truly three-way exchange of knowledge and ideas between our respective organizations as we think about the future of Ukraine. Some introductions are in order, so let's begin with those. The Fordham University Real Estate Institute, where it's my honor to teach and serve on the Executive Advisory Council, currently offers a variety of real estate-related bachelor's and master's degree programs at its campus at Lincoln Center here in Manhattan, New York City. The programs present the essential elements of real estate finance, investment, development, construction, and management. They're developed and taught by leading industry practitioners and are centered on imparting real-world professional skill sets. The Counselors of Real Estate, of which I'm a member, is an international consortium of credentialed real estate problem solvers who provide expert advice on complex real property and land-related matters. Membership is extended by invitation, though qualified individuals may self-apply, and includes principals of prominent real estate, financial, legal, and accounting firms, as well as developers, economists, futurists, and leaders of Wall Street and academia. Today's guest speakers are all members of the Counselors of Real Estate. Steve Norris is based in Pasadena, California, and is principal of Norris Realty Advisors, a commercial real estate valuation and consulting firm. He is also a real estate faculty member at UCLA's Extension and its Anderson School of Management. Greg Peterson is based in Boston, Massachusetts, and is a lawyer at the firm Kasner & Edwards, where he advises clients on all phases of real estate development, transactions, partnerships, leases, financing, and land use regulation. Steve and Greg both served on the Counselors Consulting Corps that advised the town of Paradise, California, the subject of today's presentation. Kevin Turpin is based in Prague, Czech Republic, and is Regional Director of Capital Markets for Colliers Central and Eastern Europe. Kevin is responsible for the delivery of investment opportunities and a regional service platform to Colliers clients across the core markets of Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, Romania, Slovakia, and Bulgaria. Ralph Peter Koschny is based in Hamburg, Germany, and is spokesman of the Executive Board of Bulwiengesa AG, where he is responsible for business segment development, analysis and concepts, portfolio evaluation and transactions, as well as retail and leisure real estate. He is also chair of the European chapter of the Counselors of Real Estate. Kevin and Ralph have joined us to share their perspectives on past rebuilding efforts elsewhere on the European continent. For those registered as participants on the Zoom call, as Mikna mentioned, I invite you to submit questions during the presentation using the chat feature, so we can see your questions and pose them to the speakers. And with that, Steve, I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you, Neil. So speaking on behalf of all of the counselors, we're honored to have been just a small part of the process of helping Paradise rebuild. We'd like to also acknowledge the fact that the counselors has its own foundation who partially financed our work. And we're doubly honored and really very humbled to have the opportunity to speak to all of you at the Kyiv School. It's been a fascinating process preparing for this. And what we hope will result from this is an ongoing long-term relationship between the counselors and the school of idea sharing, learning. We have a lot to learn. We've been sort of reading from a fire hose, as we say here, with materials Migna's provided to us to learn a little bit about markets in Ukraine and what has been going on thus far and prior to the conflict. We're looking forward to helping in a small way to assist Ukraine to a brighter future of rebuilding and hope. There are also a number of members of the European chapter of the counselors attending the webinar. So from all of us at the counselors, a very humble thank you. I want to start then and share a screen here, and I'm going to try and get through this in about 15 minutes if I can, just to give you a high altitude view of what we were up to in the city of Paradise in California in 2021 and our report in early 2022. And so here we go. Just being dangerous with technology here. There we go. Looks like, am I a success? Does it look like Mina? Okay, excellent. So we're just going to lead you through the process that I put together here. This is basically a summary of other reports we've given to a variety of groups, and much of this is taken from our report to the people in Paradise. So I think the first place we need to start is, where in the world is a town named Paradise? And how did it get that name? Well, it was originally a logging town in the late 1800s, early 1900s, north of Sacramento, and quite a ways north of San Francisco and as well Los Angeles. Prior to the massive wildfire in November of 2018, the city of Paradise had a population of approximately 25,000 people. Immediately following the campfire, the population plummeted to 3,500, so a reduction of approximately 90%. Today, the population is recovering slowly and is presently close to 6,500 people. Fire resulted in the total loss of 18,000 structures. Of these, approximately 14,000 were single-family homes. The fire damaged or destroyed more than 150,000 acres, or 600 million square meters. 85 lives were lost, and 52,000 people in total were evacuated. The consulting corps was invited by the Paradise Association of Realtors, which is what we refer to here in the States as people who sell single-family homes, after they had faced almost 3 years of development and construction delays that were highly frustrating. So this is a view of Paradise in the spring of 2018, approximately 6 months prior to the fire. The important thing to look for here is the color dark green. Anything that is dark green here is very likely a 50 to 75 foot tall evergreen tree. Paradise was essentially built in the forest. And as a result of that, where streets are here, you can't really see the number of homes because they're essentially almost all hidden by the trees. A year later, here's Paradise. And so you can get a sense here of the extent of the damage without zooming in. There's very few remaining structures, and there's very few remaining trees. If my memory serves me, I think they removed, and Greg will correct me, I think it was something like, was it 15,000 trees, Greg, or maybe twice that amount? Anyway, a lot of trees. The consulting core team consisted of 6 individuals from throughout the United States who specialized in a variety of real estate disciplines, including valuation, law, planning, development, forestry, and real estate economics and housing studies. We also had the providential blessing of having a team member who was in charge at the point that he worked on our team of providing fire loss housing for wildfire victims in the immediate adjoining state of Oregon to the north. The challenges that were faced by Paradise were many. And that included an uncertainty related to any insurance coverage on homes and how much would be paid back to homeowners. There were a number of issues with infrastructure timelines. You can imagine a fire that had this level of devastation, that there was essentially a significant loss to infrastructure. Every electrical pole in Paradise required replacement. Paradise's older, inexpensive housing supply was largely gone. The entire town had sewer systems on septic. Nothing was connected to a pipe. And so this created a significant limitation in relation to current code for building permits of providing adequate sanitary services to the city. There was a significant amount of government and regulatory complexity and inflexibility. There was a broad lack of community awareness of available assistance efforts and where to start if you are a resident. There were a number of projects proposed in the immediate aftermath of the fire that had exceedingly long timelines to completion. This included a plan to provide a sewer system to the town, a new sewer system that would involve an outflow pipe that would run 25 miles outside of town and to a water source where water could be recycled. However, this plan would only affect approximately, I think it was 5 or 10% of the parcels of land that were in the town. And so it was essentially a commercial sewer system for a very small fraction of what was impacted by the fires. So our initial team visit occurred in June of 2021. That was my visit with a team leader. And the important thing that I learned on that day, even though this is my state and involved only about an hour plane ride north from my home in Southern California, was that essentially everyone who lived in Paradise and who was either had moved out to neighboring towns or was still in town attempting to rebuild, almost everyone were victims of traumatic stress disorder. And this is something I'm sure is an issue in Ukraine. Working with people, caring for them, getting things accomplished in the midst of sort of an emotional recovery as well. The entire team visited in July of 2021. We interviewed more than 50 stakeholders. These included elected officials, staff, local businesses, residents, and other subject matter experts. Our team held over 20 Zoom calls during the pandemic to work on this project from July to December of 2021. We researched, analyzed, discussed, and developed recommendations. To the best of my knowledge, Greg, there were no arguments during this process. We got along swimmingly. So we came up with what we felt was an action plan that tried to wrap its arms around the level of trauma that was going on and the extent of loss. Our primary recommendation to the City of Paradise was that they should look for a person or a very small team of what we referred to as deal makers, and really in particular, a deal maker. Now, this is where we sort of depart from the traditional perspective of having government solve the problem. And this was the role of Bruce, one of our team members, who is doing this now in Oregon and had a lot to offer in terms of whether or not this was work. He and a single partner had been retained by the governor of Oregon to undertake fire loss housing in that state. They were well underway in the process when we met as a team. So recognizing that real estate development and our public processes of land use, planning and entitlements, that's the right to build entitlements, are by nature not designed to move quickly, and many times what appear to be good ideas made by well-intentioned, thoughtful, smart people and companies often have fundamental flaws that kill the opportunity to no fault of anyone. It just happens for many reasons. The key is to not waste time chasing down what we refer to as empty rabbit holes. Hiring a deal maker to expedite, advise, filter out, and suggest ways to overcome obstacles, in some cases will provide a reality check to the idea so as to save the public's time and money. This is the best thing the community can do, in our opinion, to move real estate deals forward more quickly. What we wanted to see was roofs appearing in Paradise. This was our recommendation. Now, whether that was acted upon is another story that we can answer in the question period. But this is the sort of thing that we feel it crosses over to essentially a number of venues. And perhaps after we learn more, it might be something that we can discuss in further in just more of its theoretical concepts in Ukraine. I'm going to let Greg take over now and talk a little bit more about some of our other action plan points.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you all. It's a pleasure to be here for what is just early afternoon on the U.S. East Coast. I think, a key conclusion of our group was that that 3 years had gone by the time we flew in effectively, without significant amounts of rebuilding. Fundamentally because of a number of sources of uncertainty. I think there are parallels to be made conceivably, with lots of other situations. Certainly we're seeing similar kinds of uncertainty impact the speed of rebuilding and even the willingness to rebuild in other natural disaster and climate change aftermaths here in North America. So literally while we were visiting in July of 21, another major fire, Fort Wildfire, blew up only 10 miles from where we were. And we would wake up every morning with smoke in the air so thick that you could not see more than about half a kilometer. And I'm going to try to use kilometers rather than miles here for the obvious reason. And everything smelled of smoke. And all the people who had lived through the fire, and in some cases had to pile on top of each other and put wet things on top of themselves and their children to survive, just the smell of the smoke in the air would, bring them back to a very high state of concern and arousal. And when those of us who are on the East Coast flew out, the smoke from the wildfire that I just mentioned that had been going on throughout the time we were there stretched almost to Colorado, which, if you know the United States, is about a third of the way across the North American continent from the Pacific coast, to the Rocky Mountains. So just the continual presence of fires was creating a lot of uncertainty. In addition to that, there were delays that I would say had human causes, human psychological causes, among others. Much of the population pre-fire of Paradise had been older people, senior citizens, elders of limited financial means. And when their houses burned down, they didn't necessarily have lots of capital to turn to. They had, one insurance payout to look at. Some of them still had mortgages on the property, which complicated arrangements with insurers. And everyone began to dream of what one might call winning the lottery, but the perfect solution, which was, who caused the fire? Well, Pacific Gas and Electric, right? The privately owned, publicly regulated big utility literally had not taken care of equipment that had been put in place in the 1920s, equipment nearly 100 years old. And that caused the spark, literally the spark that set the fire. PG&E was on the hook for tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars. And the result was that PG&E, I think for the second time in its corporate life, put itself into a bankruptcy proceeding to try to eliminate those exposures. So the result was everybody was saying, well, when the PG&E money comes in, my ship will come in, I'll have the money. But of course, it was exposed to all the delays of the judicial process and structured payments and uncertainty about what was going to happen. And so the result was that this was a population that kept waiting for the fires to stop. Well, the fires aren't going to stop. And a population that kept waiting for, the big pots of money to show up. Well, the biggest pot of money of all was not going to show up for some time. So part of our sort of response to people was, take control of what you can take control of, right? At your human level, at the level of your neighborhood, your friends, and see what you can do. Fortunately, the town had solved one of the problems even before we got there, which was one of water supply. There was great concern that because the water in Paradise was piped through effectively, PVC and related sort of plastic piping, that the fire might have actually changed the chemical composition of those pipes in ways that would actually poison people who drank the water or showered in the water or cooked with the water. And there was a process that the town manager went through to actually demonstrate that that was not the case. So fortunately, water infrastructure was available. The big issue with sewer, and sewer capacity, as Steve has already said, was another reason why it was taking a long time, to take action, because many of those issues are in the control of a regional water board, right? That doesn't just involve the town of Paradise, but lots of others. So fundamentally, and there were lots of issues with insurance as well. So fundamentally, our argument was, take control of your own future to the extent that you can. You can't control everything, but you can stop waiting for the PG&E money. You can try to use what elements of the PG&E money you have access to now, today, and leverage those through sympathetic lenders who understand the local market to try to, spur activity. If you have a situation where old lots that in American parlance were grandfathered, that is to say, the old rules were frozen in place in terms of septic, capacity and how you disposed of wastewater, how you treated wastewater on site. Well, if those don't work, then make it much easier for people to combine lots. Let's just face, reality there. Let's find other ways to use existing wastewater capacity that you already have in the community that are not being used currently. So, for example, there were many mobile home or trailer parks, caravan parks, if you will, in sort of British English terms, in Paradise before the fire. Well, all of those had significant remaining septic, capacity, but were effectively not being used. So encouraging the town to look for ways to allow those to be repurposed. There was also, as Steve had said, a great focus on, well, we want to have exactly the right kind of town, in the future. So let's not be too quick about approving things. Let's apply the old rules to the new reality. And all the way down as far as while we were there, the town was actively talking about telling people that they could no longer live on their own property in recreational vehicles, in caravans, in camper trucks. And our response on that one was, well, not so fast. Why is it hurting your town, right? Why? I mean, the more people you have here, right, the greater the community that you can muster, the faster your commercial activity is going to take, is going to come back, the better, the stronger the political voice you're going to have. Just let people do that. And ultimately they did. They basically extended the rules allowing, temporary housing for multiple years. And I think honestly, that's an important takeaway that we have yet to learn in lots of other examples in the US. And I think we'll probably be circling back on when other examples that come to us. Insurance was a huge issue. So the insurance companies basically decided that they didn't want to be in the business of insuring in fire-prone areas anymore. Well, here's the problem. That's 25% of the populated area of the entire state of California. That's 10 million people. How do you tell 10 million people, not just around Paradise, but in coastal places like Santa Cruz, in Malibu, not that far from where Steve lives, where I'm sure he gets to go surfing and play almost every weekend, people were suddenly being told your insurance premium is going to go up by 3x or 4x, or in some cases, if you're looking at social housing, what we call affordable housing in the States, that community found itself unable to get any insurance at any price whatsoever. We encouraged folks locally to work at the local level to adopt programs that would make sure that brush cutting, right, took place on a regular basis, that there was a regular program for inspecting housing that had been rebuilt to keep, dry vegetation that was in the gutters of roofs, to get those out, because those had been the source of most of the ignition where the houses burned. And to work with those insurance companies who were prepared to use drone and artificial intelligence technology. There was actually a company out of Oakland that had just started doing this, Oakland, California, to bring the granularity of insurance down, insurance premium setting and, insurance underwriting decisions down to a sort of block by block kind of basis, ultimately a parcel by parcel basis, and not on an entire postal code basis, because you're not going to have the correct information there. I think that covers most of it at the level I think we can cover it here, and I think I've gone on long enough, so I'm gonna stop it there.
We're looking forward very much to your questions, and we have questions for you. And I don't think we can fit them all into the time we have remaining. But what I do want to do is provide to you a quick overview of what the Counseling Consulting Corps did in Paradise and does throughout the United States, all on a pro bono basis, supported by a number of foundations, including the Counselors of Real Estate. So here is a quick several-minute view of what we did when we were in Paradise, just to sort of illustrate our work.
Creative real estate solutions require seasoned knowledge and visionary thinking, the kind of expertise available from the counselors of real estate. Counselors are trusted advisors solving complex real estate challenges. Through the Consulting Corps, counselors volunteer their time and expertise, bringing unrivaled problem solving to assist nonprofit and government organizations. Consulting Corps teams visited Spokane, Washington to address a lack of housing supply, Rome, New York to guide redevelopment of a former industrial site, and Paradise, California to assist with rebuilding after the devastating Camp Fire.
I heard about the Council of Real Estate from a conference that I was in Austin, Texas in 2019, right after the fire. Hearing about what they do, I knew that this was an organization, a global organization that was equipped to handle the magnitude of what we had in front of us and down the road.
This is our chance to offer our expertise from 6 individuals from around the country who have a wide variety of specialized skill in law, planning, development, valuation, forestry, and to hopefully give some new ideas and concepts and help to the people of Paradise.
They were really looking for some maybe out-of-the-box ideas on how to find a path forward. And, all these things affect one another. So trying to find, what are the key components? How do you get things jump-started and actually progressing? And then sort of getting the other things to integrate and fall into place.
It is a way for the community to move from a retrospective viewpoint toward what has happened to them and try to get oriented more towards perspective vision of what the community can and will become.
We're here to assist the town in their thinking of how to rebuild and what are the issues, what are the challenges they're facing, bringing best practices from other areas. And just kind of a strategy audit, if you will, of where they are and where we might suggest ways that they may recover more quickly. They lost 82% of the population, which has tremendous impacts throughout the community on their services, their schools, just their culture. And the quicker that people can move back, things will start to feel a little more normal. The challenge is there's so much uncertainty with the basic fundamentals of how to get people back here. And these things aren't going to take a year. Some of these things are going to take many, 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 many years.
One of the important things that the Councils of Real Estate did was that they gave a gift to Paradise that is worth minimum 100,000, probably more in the 400,000 that really Paradise may not have been able to afford on their own. My only wish is that they had been able to come in sooner. I would love to see CRE actually activated much sooner in a disaster to really start that process, at least like 1 year post-disaster.
The recommendations from the report were fantastic. They clearly did a great job listening to us and really understanding what our challenges were. They really delved into understanding what our barriers have been and seeing areas where they could help with their expertise. And that really came through in the report.
They've reached out to me after this report and said that we're here through the long term, and having that to be able to rely on, to be able to call these experts at any time and say, hey, I'm going through this right now. What do you think? Has been an extremely valuable resource for the town. And we just really appreciate everything that they've done and their willingness to support and help the town of Paradise.
So what should the future look like? This is Paradise in 1950. Most of these buildings were lost in the fire. It's basically the street was empty at the point of our visit. And there were 2 really important points there I hadn't thought about for quite some time. Bruce Wood, who spoke about the project taking many, many, many years. I think you friends in Ukraine understand that. And that's the timeline we're working on. Is we realize much of our culture here in the States is instant. We get upset when our Amazon package doesn't show up the next day. That is not something that this matter, it addresses itself to. You need a lot of time. And Jennifer Gray Thompson, who is quoted at the end, who works at a nonprofit called After the Fire, offered something else, which is, the opportunity to get started on working on solutions early on is very helpful. And so with that, I think we should begin a conversation and questions. Let you folks pitch in. We may also want to hear, and I'm going to defer to Neil on this at this point. Neil, would we like to hear from any of our European chapter members?
Yes, absolutely. Anybody who is able, please submit your questions and do so through the Q&A. I guess that's going to work better than the chat function in Zoom. But questions for Ralph and Kevin. What experiences are you familiar with in Europe that required massive rebuilding? And what were some of the things that worked well, and what were some of the things that didn't work well?
Thank you very much, Neil. But first of all, I think I should introduce the European chapter a little bit so that everybody is a bit more familiar what we are doing in Europe with similar questions and issues. So the European chapter consists about now 50 members, and it's spread over about 10 countries. It's a network of real estate experts who work together on project or real estate topics, and have also developed a personal common understanding, which is really important for us because it brings us together between the different countries. Only selected experts are admitted to the chapter, as Steve already introduced. We are in the process of expanding the network to other countries. Experts from Ukraine are welcome at any time at the moment. The European chapter is following the events in Ukraine intensively. We strongly condemn the attack. Our thoughts and feelings are with those who are suffering because of the war. But we think that it's already appropriate to deal with the reconstruction and interaction in the European structure. The European chapter is ready to assist in the issues of reconstruction and integration in Europe. The support can range from technical assistance in the form of content exchange to joint projects. I, as the chairman of the European chapter, was able to gain a lot of experience after the reunification of occupied East Germany with West Germany. At this time, I worked for the Development Corporation of Hamburg, and we had a partnership with the city of Dresden. And I was sent over to Dresden to assist the municipality to adapt West German standards. Many mistakes were made, but good projects were also initiated. Together with the European chapter, I hope to be able to pass on these lessons learned to Ukraine in the near future. For me, the time where I worked in Dresden after the reunification was a really great experience, which I really don't want to miss. So I would like to hand over to Kevin, who can continue with his thoughts on this issue. Kevin?
Yeah, thank you, Ralph. So my name's Kevin, obviously, you can read that there. I'm originally from the UK, but I've been living in the Czech Republic and working across Central and Eastern Europe for the last 22 years. I mean, during that time, I would say I'm fortunate to have not seen any conflict and any mass need for rebuilding in that time. Of course, there has been a number of conflicts around the world during that time, and some of our members, were involved in consulting on the aftermath of the Iraq War. But what I can say is that the markets here in Central and Eastern Europe, have all had or been under the influence of Russia in the past. And that has led to a rebuilding or restructuring of a different type, which I'm sure you are equally aware of. But obviously in today's world, that looks very, very different and obviously quite frightening and devastating. So what I can say is that following the fall of the Iron Curtain and communism a little over 30 years ago, these markets, most of them are neighbours to you, have gone through quite a lengthy process. And again, it was just to recap on that what was said earlier, that these things obviously take considerable amounts of time to play out. And whilst these markets here in Central and Eastern Europe have been growing and building for the last 30 years, they continue to do so, both economically and also both from a real estate and infrastructure standpoint. Now, a lot of that is thanks to some of the memberships that these countries now currently enjoy. Now, these are obviously also a little bit contentious and obviously get quite political in respect to NATO, the European Union, some of which have been cited as sparking off this war. But membership for these countries has been quite essential in terms of the funding that's available and collective legal information sharing, efforts to sort of share, or I'd say, or at least fairly share economic growth among member states. So there's a lot of things that can be drawn upon and examples, I think, that that your neighboring countries and also further afield in Western Europe and of course in the US and other countries can share with you. And as I said, as the gentlemen have already said, we're happy to be here and for the invitation to do so, and look forward to any questions that you might have.
Steve and Greg, I have a question about time frame. How did you strike a balance, or how did the town of Paradise strike a balance between making quick decisions for expedience sake versus doing things too fast that ended up having longer term ramifications that maybe were regrettable? Two examples that came up in your presentation. One was the contemplation of a very, very, very long sewer line, which sounded to me like something that would take a long time to put in place and might delay other things from happening. And at the other end of the spectrum, a decision to allow recreational vehicles, campers and motorhomes to reside on owners' properties. That sounds like a decision that was made on a Monday and implemented on a Tuesday and had immediate benefits and really didn't close down any longer term options. How did the town of Paradise, and how did you counsel them in making the decision about weighing those two factors off against each other?
So I'm sure Greg has many thoughts. I can just tell you from personal experience, Neil, and I'll let Greg flesh this out, that after 2 full days of learning as much as we could, talking to people, city officials, folks on the Realtors Board, understanding what was going on in real estate markets, and then the suggestions that had been made. What we sat down and had a coffee on our last morning, our full team, and we were all kind of looking at each other like, what can we do? Specifically because many of the solutions that had been offered thus far had a 5 to 10 year time frame. And our friend Bruce Reed, who works in Oregon, said what this town needs is roofs going up now. What kind of answers can we give them that help them to get to that place as expeditiously as possible? Right, Greg? Add to that, please.
Yeah, let me actually pick up on that, because we had been told going in that the good folks who are the local brokers, the local estate agents in sort of British English parlance, okay, never wanted to hear any of us utter the words tiny homes. Tiny homes or tiny houses that was supposed to be stricken from our vocabulary. And yet it became really pretty obvious pretty quickly that some version of that, okay, whether it's insulated yurts or actual
modular
modular housing as backed up as the factories for that are, printed homes, because it turns out that there's a company in coastal California that actually is doing 3D printing and delivering of housing stock, okay? That these were things that actually would make a difference and would bring people in. And the irony of the situation is that you've got this formerly, let's call it what it was, senior housing, retirement community, right? Up on top of the ridge. A mere 20 miles away, you have the city of Chico, California, home of Chico State University, okay, part of the Cal University system. Absolutely built out to its full capacity, right? Rents that are crazy, young people looking for places to go where they could have homes. You would think that, a car in California lasts pretty much forever, right, Steve? I mean, you never have salt on the road. So you buy a car and 40 years later, you're still driving the same darn car, right? So realistically, you could actually solve a lot of the housing supply needs of Chico, which has growing businesses, a big university, a young population, in this place, a 30-minute drive away. And yet, because of some, concern about what that might mean for the long term, there'd been kind of a go slow approach. And I think that's one example where I don't think it was a decision made on a Monday, or talked about on a Monday and implemented on a Tuesday. It wasn't quite that dramatic, Neil, but I think it's fair to say that senior leadership heard us say, why are you stopping people from coming back? However they can come back, however they can have a roof over their heads, however they can start to rebuild community, right? However you can get kids into the school, do it. Just do it. Just seize every opportunity you have.
In conversation with our friends at After the Fire, which is really tackling fires throughout the Western US, one of the things that they've been talking about, and they're actually working on, is a sort of a putting together a toolkit for community leaders. This is for people, elected people, appointed people who run planning, who run zoning, who oversee development. And it's really a list of things not to do, not things to do. And it really is sort of a response to human nature, which is, there's been a fire. Oh my goodness, we have to do something. And often they pick from the list of things they shouldn't. So it's subtle and you have to think it through, but it's a different way to think about how you begin to tackle something that's a long-term issue that needs help along the way and doesn't need impediments.
Another example is, a business that actually started in Chico shortly after the fire, and not just this fire, but because there'd been so many fires ongoing, right through last summer. And that was a company that was using old World War II Quonset hut technology, okay? Which it turns out can actually be rendered very fire resistant very quickly, okay? And built very quickly and cheaply with some concrete foundations, the metal, arch over, and you're ready to go at low cost. So there was a whole bunch of stuff that started to be talked about. Obviously, it still takes time, right? And the large sewage system, that was not a decision made by the city of Paradise, the town of Paradise. That was completely out of their control. That was a decision of a regional water board answerable, to state water authorities in the state capital of Sacramento. And please understand that California is a big place. California's got between 40 and 50 million people, okay? California, in many measures, right, acts and operates like a country on its own. As Americans who don't live in California will be happy to tell Californians. But the result is that there were just some things that were outside of local control. have those battles when you can later on. I mean, I'm also going to, just to be completely honest here, there was also a political component to this, which is Paradise and the population in Paradise and some of its surrounding community were older and whiter than and more conservative than the rest of California by a fair margin. I mean, it was jokingly referred to as one of the southernmost parts of the state of Jefferson, a state that does not exist in the United States, but which some people have tried to create so there would be yet, you know, some more conservative senators in the United States Senate. But that in itself created a certain amount of tension, particularly in the California State Senate, about, okay, well, how are we going to help these people? What are we really taking on with all the stuff, you know, from all the fires everywhere? There's kind of a natural reaction to say, well, don't move back, right? If you're in a dangerous place, why are you moving back, right? People say that about flood victims all the time. Well, in many cases, where else is there to go, right? I mean, where are you going to put 10 million Californians tomorrow if you had to? I think California can't find places for all the people it has, you know, let alone getting rid of opportunities now. So, Mikna, you've got a hand up.
Yeah, I have actually two questions. So the first one is a little bit related to this demographic composition that you referred to. So in a sense, do people want to come back to a reconstructed home or to a reconstructed life? You mentioned that they're willing to, you know, maybe take tiny houses for some time, but probably you're willing to take a tiny house because you expect a bigger house later on. Perhaps you can, you know, get your job back or maybe even a better one. So how was this? And, you know, you mentioned this quite often, the uncertainty related to all the aspects of reconstruction, of community, of your own life, and so on and so on. So how was this managed? Because, you know, there's one thing, a leader comes in and says, oh, we have to regroup and do things for the next 6 months, but then after 3 months, people just move out because there's no opportunity. How do you get this process in place?
That was the conversation at the coffee shop, and on that morning. What really needs to happen is to expedite the process of development of homes, whether those are multifamily or single family, because bringing the homes back brings back eventually the commercial. And I mean, I think Paradise is in the midst of a decades-long learning process as to what that's going to look like. I think the demographics of Paradise are going to change. I think a lot of the people who were farther on in life, who had their retirement homes there, are still to this day waiting for a Pacific Gas and Electric check. And when they get it, they're going to keep it and they're going to sell their lot. However, those lots are going to go to somebody else, and they'll probably go to younger homeowners who are willing to live in a tiny house for a while or are willing to take on new challenges. So building structures and building a community are two different things. Now, you know, I'm very curious, and I have a long list of questions for your students and you about how life is unique in Ukraine. And so let's hear some more questions. Neil, are we getting them at your end, or is Manea doing that?
Yeah, so please write them in the Q&A. This is going to be the easiest. So I see Catherine has a raised hand, but it's much easier for us if you just type it in, and then, you know, we can roll it there. So while Catherine is doing this, hopefully, Ralph, I have a very brief question. You mentioned this process for Dresden. I think what's interesting, at least for the European experience, is that the cities had to be rebuilt while institutions have to be rebuilt. So how does this play out? It's quite difficult, you know. So there's, I think I've tried to convey to you the challenges that are now present in Ukraine, having development rules put in place, development associations that care for the end customer, not for the developer, care for quality of construction standards, for planning, and so on and so forth. When these are missing, it can be quite wild, and sometimes good intentions, like Steve said, produced these very ugly houses in all Eastern Europe, which were built fast, and then clogged our cities 30 years later, right? How do you design this when the institutions are co-evolving together with the communities?
You refer to the time after the reunification, right?
Yes.
The first thing is that it was important to gain confidence. Because, when I worked for the city of Hamburg, I'm not sure whether we were really welcome at this time, because, we were really separated for years. And now with the fall of the wall, from one moment to another, we were unified. And so the objective was that the eastern part adapted our standard, our planning law, our heuristical system. This was not so difficult. The most difficult thing was the acceptance. And I remember when I worked for the municipality in Dresden, the first thing I tried to teach them is how to cope with the challenges of investors. Because, the Western investors, they have totally different interests than the Eastern part at this time. And we paid a lot of attention that the Eastern part could really keep their interest and don't be so dependent on Western investors and Western standards. But to be honest, the reunification has been done so far. But to be honest, in our mind, there is still a border. The behavior of Eastern and Western people are still slightly different. The standards are still different too. And there is still an obstacle between East and West. And I suppose it takes, again, a long time until we have really overcome the obstacles.
Yeah, many thanks. Sorry, Neil. So you mentioned this frictions in understanding perhaps the needs of private investors. So for Ukraine, many of these reconstruction plans focus quite a lot on public-private partnerships. But obviously, this private element would need to have the clarity of law, it would need the clarity of governance, would need clarity on inflation and many other things. I don't know, maybe Kevin, can you tell us how this was, why was it different maybe across Central Eastern Europe, why these things played out so differently in different parts of Central Eastern Europe?
I can give it a try. I mean, of course, yeah, we had quite a considerable volume of prefabricated concrete block housing, and a lot of it still exists today. One of the solutions to modernize that was just to sort of wrap it in polystyrene and make it a little bit more efficient, or give it a slightly better thermal covering. And I mean, over a number of years, sort of ever since, things like government-controlled rents were phased out over a period of time. Private investors, either individuals or funds, came in and have bought up a number of those. To some extent taking away, if you like to call it, a burden from the government. And of course, alongside that, new developments were introduced across a majority of markets. But a lot of this was done with master planning and was relatively well thought out. But to arrive at those master plans, and they have to be revisited from time to time. They have to be, again, rethought out to address the needs of not just today, but obviously 10, 20 years in the future. And as was mentioned perhaps earlier, and maybe relevant to Ukraine, that where where people are displaced and, for various reasons, nothing there exists anymore, but, or alternatively, economically, people, congregate on the larger cities because that's where the opportunities are. Then also you've got to plan for, and think, how demographics are going to behave in the future, how, younger generations view living. Do they want to buy? If you're building for sale stock, are they going to buy it? Can they buy it? Can they afford it? The answer today is, largely not. The way things are and the way things have been developing with, massive house price inflation over the last 10 years. Largely thanks to cheap money. And similarly, you've got a lot of, most of this development coming online in recent years has been in the hands of private developers who are, doing that for a profit. And the governments are struggling to deliver affordable housing, and it's a problem not that so many countries around the world have. So having a good plan, taking stock of what a country or city has in terms of its resources, its space, its talents, its economic possibilities. All these things need to be taken into consideration, as is the conversation between the various players, whether that's the government and private investors or individuals, in order to fulfill those plans. This the list is endless of the things that you need to consider, from obviously firsthand the security of investments, and the longevity of that, and all the sort of legal and other technical frameworks that need to fall into place as well. So we've seen a number of challenges in these areas, from if you have a master plan, you apply you apply for permitting, and like I said, similar to Paradise, you come across barriers. Fortunately, many of them were overcome quite easily, but in some cases they're simply not. To give an example, from Czech Republic, we have master plans in place, but the planning and permitting regime is so poor. You can buy a piece of land and you might not get to start laying your first bricks for many years afterwards, whereas other countries in the region, it could be much shorter. It could be 1-2 years. So, so there's lots of different imbalances, particularly also that's also fed by rapidly changing, governments, none of which, help a great deal. And also, coming out of, those times going back 30 years, there were, a number of people or groups that, that benefited from privatization of state assets, and and it's some of those people are still in control, of a lot of the activity today. So, yes, take it as you will. So it's also important to have the dialogue with with all the various players involved, to make sure that that you've got everyone at the table. And as I said, I mean, for your students here present today, it's as the future leaders of your country and participants, it's important that you start to think about these things and get involved.
Really, thanks. Yeah, Greg, go ahead, please.
Let me just ask a very practical question of you, okay, and your colleagues from the Kyiv School of Economics that are on the call. Suppose you lived in an apartment block that had been significantly damaged in the course of the conflict. And you and your neighbors, in fact, want to continue to live there. What would you have to do to rebuild?
Yeah, so we had a workshop during the summer where some of our colleagues and students went to Borodnyanka and to Irpin around Kyiv to look at how things have developed. And the solution has been to try to keep people as much as possible around those that wanted to stay. And again, this modular housing turned out to be a temporary solution to offer those who don't have an alternative, to offer a possibility to stay around. Municipalities tried to clean up and reinstalled a lot of infrastructure as much as possible. These were actually quite prized communities outside of Kyiv, because obviously once rents go very high in Kyiv, or traffic keeps you away, keeps you blocked on the street and so on and so forth, people look for the peace and quiet of the greenery around the city. So there was this mix of high-rise and very old sort of post agricultural properties, but this is the way they were developing. So those who had the possibility to leave, they left simply because they would perhaps work online, or they were a very particular, let's say, demographic, right? That cherished the certainty of security more than the possibility of growing fast by coming back. Those who are left there in these communities faced great challenges, and this is not something that's, it's not easy. The biggest thing is, through whom do we build? And this was a question that our students asked. The community that's there obviously has been given preference, but the question is for what kind of life? And this is still, in a sense, it's an ongoing debate. I don't think it's easy to give an answer right away. And again, the solutions seem to be very different from community to community. Some are just overwhelmed by internal migration. And for example, now we see rents going up in the western part of the city, western part of the country, sorry. And these are internal migrants. At some point, this will create some further disequilibrium. This will push everything up, all sorts of prices up. This will create perhaps, pressures on the public infrastructure, such as hospitals, such as kindergartens, and so on and so forth. This process was to some degree also there in 2014, 2015, when this war actually started. Now the press talks about 9 months, but it's been years ongoing. And the first waves of migration have had a lot of issues that Ralph was talking about. It's beyond just simple cultural differences. It's ways of understanding your relationship to the state, how you pay your taxes or not, how you respect rules or not. These vary quite a lot from east to west. And these are cultural challenges that are very difficult to iron over, even by giving people how to point, in a sense. Catherine, I see you still have your hand up. Do you want to ask a question? I'll just unmute you and you can go ahead and directly ask.
Yes, I would like to ask a question. It's about, well, in Paradise, was anybody doing anything for people? I mean, when you have to do such a project, the more you can get people positive and believing, I think the faster and the better it will go. So I think, I mean, I have worked in some, not to compare with Ukraine or to compare with Paradise, but where there have been very difficult situations. And there we have kind of started with making a place where people could make pizzas and sit together in an environment together to rebuild social relationship, to take care of people in the location. And from there, when you sit together and you have a place you can talk, you can take some very low-hanging fruits and then do the more and more difficult things as as time goes by. Was there any such kind of activities in Paradise?
So that is a terrific question. Literally so terrific. And it's not something we did because we weren't sociologists. I continue to be incredibly curious about that question on a number of levels. And, you know, I don't really know the answer, but I do know that the little bit I do know is that I think my impression is that, and this is from many thousands of miles away, and I've been told this by a couple of people who I've consulted just to talk about the fact that we're doing this webinar, is that there is a characteristic of the Ukrainian people that Americans lack. And that is that they learn how to quickly adapt and do courageous things that I don't know that we may be capable of. And I think that I'm interested, Catherine, to learn more about what you did and where you did it, because I think this is the advantage you may have, is as a people. I mean, you have massive scores of volunteers, both fighting the war, doing medical recovery, assisting people. I mean, we're reading about it here on a daily basis, and it's quite moving. So if you could talk a little bit more about your experience, I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, well, you have to see, I'm not from Ukraine, I'm from Denmark, where it's very quiet. We don't have war. We did the Second World War, but it's a long time ago. We don't have any earthquakes. I have a background in retail, and now I own shopping centers. And I know, and we have been dealing with places where there's been a lot of criminality, where people have been tearing, doing crime. But the moment you start to make a social hotspot where people can sit and eat together, magic starts to happen. And this is something that is really inexpensive. You don't need any ruling. You don't, I mean, it's so easy. And from there, you can kind of get the power back in people. And from there, you can start to act, because a lot of the things that you have to do, rebuilding all these houses, sort out legal issues, as you have mentioned, it takes long time. So what can we do so people can get hope in a very, very short note? And if you do that in the small communities close to where people live or lived, so it's kind of their home, and you create this nice environment where you can kind of forget what happened, because now we're just having pizza and some beers, which is normal. Then you have a starting point.
Yeah, it's interesting you should mention pizza and beer, because I think the place where Paradise started to come back together were the literal less than handful of restaurants that managed to either survive or be restarted pretty quickly after the fire. So there was a Thai restaurant, there was a pizza and beer joint, and there was a sort of breakfast and lunch place that actually had been funded by an American sports star, a guy by the name of Aaron Rodgers, who was a quarterback with the Green Bay Packers at the time, and whose foundation deliberately, I think, threw $1 million at the problem of these people need a place to meet and talk and eat, right? And it's kind of the world kitchen solution in a way as well. What Paradise really was hit with kind of a 1-2 punch, okay? Because you had the fire in November of 18, and barely more than a year later, and a lot of people sort of left, right? I mean, some of the population ended up in FEMA trailers down in Chico, or in a couple of other spots, you know, nearby. The benevolent associations, the brotherhood associations, like the Moose, okay, for example, and I think the Elks as well. These are probably American institutions, and you're all going to look at us in Europe and say, moose, elks? What kind of wild place do you have over there in North America? But these are social organizations where literally for a membership fee of $25 a month, I'm sorry, $25 a year, you could become a member and then park on the place where the Moose Hall or the Elks Hall used to be that had burned down, and put your wastewater into their system and have a social hall, right? Literally a tent, a social hall where people could get together and have conversations. And, so yes, it did happen, and it happened quite organically on the part of just handfuls of people who wanted to, who saw the possibility and wanted to make human connections. Other people moved farther away, particularly the people with money, and they would come in on Zoom calls, and then that didn't work out so well. The 1-2 punch was, first you had the fire, and just over a year later, 15 months later, you had COVID, right? And all of a sudden, all kinds of that social activity stuff just was brought to a screeching halt. And sort of froze things again for another sort of 2-year period roughly.
Beyond the private initiatives of social, of sociological support and psychological support, there are also so-called invisibility tents where people can go and warm up and have access to internet and so on and so forth. And these are distributed across the cities. So these are set up, and I think these are extremely important relief points. And of course, it rebuilds slowly the community, and they're quite essential. Our students have also took the exact same approach. They went and asked people what they wanted. The first thing we understood is that as people have very different understanding of their own expectations regarding the future, designing perhaps or thinking of a plan will actually not get everybody happy. And this is already something that we're sort of trying to discuss with them to see that these are costs and benefits, and that we can't get everybody happy. And this is not easy to, in a sense, to communicate or perhaps to structure as such, because everyone rightfully has their own expectations, just that as we started off, the costs are short-term and the benefits are very long-term. Some people understand long-term as being 3 years. Some people understand long-term as being 15 years. And many frictions emerge from there. So yes, the process is in place. It's actually institutionalized in a sense. But we will need to have more tools, because as soon as we start talking about more than just pizza and beer, it's no longer sociology, and people don't take it as such.
So may I just now looked up invincibility tents, because I was sure that it wasn't invisibility tents. And I will put a link to that article from The Guardian in our chat just for the heck of it. Greg will remember the story of, I think it was called the Bear Cafe on the main street, that tried to reopen, went to City Hall and found out they now needed one more parking space. And that basically stopped the redevelopment of that restaurant. And then, Catherine, think of the effects of not having that town square setting open. And it was very sad. And these are the kind of sort of outside the real estate box things that we really need to be thinking about. It's very helpful.
Sounds to me like,
if it was up to me, I would get rid of a bunch of planning actually for some interim period of time in a lot of these situations. I think most people are more capable than we give them credit for. Sorry, Neil.
It's okay. It sounds to me like homes are the first step. Homes, as the person in the consulting course said, rooftops need to start going up now. And whilst there might be some, traditionally in the real estate disciplines, we say, well, people want to move to places where there are stores to shop in, schools to send your kids to, and medical facilities to be treated. and they might hesitate to occupy those homes if those services are lacking. It does feel like in the case of total disaster, homes are the first thing. And when people begin to occupy those homes, then they start to congregate. They find places to have pizza and beer. And as that critical mass grows, the retailers return, the services return, and eventually you have a functioning community again with all the appropriate property types. Is that a fair assessment of the order of events?
Yes.
Yeah. And Mikna, is modular home building an option in the Ukraine? Is there a way to build homes fast?
Yeah, I don't know exactly about fast, but these have already been put in place and they've been already occupied. I think the order of events that you described is has already played out actually to some degree. But of course, fires are fortunately not as frequent and as intentional of the stuff that we see. For example, there was reverse migration from abroad during the summer, and this was a very positive news. But the missile attacks then in September and October drove a lot of people away. Again, those who are just on the marginal of making the decision: do I stay or do I leave? Left the big cities because they found themselves in for a cold winter without electricity, without heating, without water. So this is I think the big challenge is this, and it goes back all the way to this problem of uncertainties, because at the end of the day, if people don't know how long this takes. It's one thing to say I plan to hold out for 6 months, for 9 months. Can I hold out for 3 years? What kind of life do I have? And this is I think the biggest challenge we face, because the process you described before, Neil, actually started to naturally happen organically. People started to come back. There's more coffee shops open. There's more foot traffic, at least in the bigger cities. But then September, October came, and in a sense, literally froze everything.
What about rental homes and with leases that are on a monthly basis?
Yes. So, for example, this is from a real estate perspective purely. There is a fundamental change in the way people understand real estate, because now real estate has to be an object far away from an electricity distribution center. Has to be a place that's on up to the 5th floor for a very simple reason. Pick your groceries and take them up to the 20th floor when you don't have an elevator for weeks. Those who could afford it, they would rent out a place outside of the city. It's called a dacha, not like the car. It sounds exactly the same, but it's literally a home away from home, where you have maybe a bit of land and so on and so forth. So the risks of these city risks, call them like this, are not there. And again, this as you talk casually with people, you realize you infer their expectations, because they were telling me at one point, oh, I don't know if I want to renew my lease for another 6 months on the dacha, which implicitly says I want to move on to the city because I think it should be better, or it should be safer, or so on and so forth. It's just that this is a process in flux. People come back, then they leave perhaps, or then they came back. And this is the big challenge in a sense. Community remains obviously the first thing to solve.
Well, I know that some of us are time constrained, and I'm wondering if this is a good place to wrap up for now. Any final thoughts or comments before we say goodbye? If not, I'll say thank you to Mikna and the Kyiv School of Economics, and thank you to Steve and Greg and Kevin and Ralph for your insights and perspective. And to all attending live or watching the recording, a big thank you for participating. It's only with your interest and engagement that we can collectively begin to address the many challenges that lay ahead. Again, I'm Neil Madsen, and on behalf of the Fordham University Real Estate Institute and the Counselors of Real Estate, I'll bid you good day or good night, as the case may be, and wish you all a happy Valentine's Day. And I will be very much looking forward to when we can meet again.
Thank you all on behalf as
Thanks,
well.
everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening. Bye.